Hi, good morning, and thanks for joining me for the third of three webinars around the introduction to inventory optimization. Today's session is a shorter session than the first two, and it's really concentrating on the purchasing side, the ordering optimization side, and how we can really improve that. So I'll jump in. I guess the first thing that I tend to see is when we come to purchase products that we need, we're looking at big long lists of products. Some companies have small amounts of SKUs, and this becomes less difficult in those situations. But if you've got more than 100, 1,000, 10,000 SKUs, then it almost becomes impossible for you to look at a list of products and work out what do I need to order, how much do I need to order, and when do I order those products. So that's kind of the first area that causes a problem, because we're trying to focus or work out where to focus our time. And we end up back in this situation. I think in the first webinar or the second webinar, we looked at this kind of warehouse where we've clearly overbought product, or we've introduced lots of new products without really working out, well, how much of that product do I buy, utilising demand history of similar products to work out what quantities of product to buy, how much do I buy, what is my MOQ, and how much stock do I need to really sit on. And I guess that there are other parts to that. So it may well be that we've had to fill a container to meet a minimum order value or a minimum order quantity. Minimum order quantities can be excessive sometimes for the amount of product that we actually need. Would we be better off sourcing the product from a different supplier in a smaller quantity? So where is all of this going wrong? How do we end up with these massively full warehouses and no capital to invest? Well, the first area for me is that no matter what ERP you're running as a business, it could be that you're on the smallest versions of Sage or the biggest versions of SAP, you'll still be faced with this kind of min-max optimum stock level issue, where the system is calculating for you a min-max and optimum level. How often you review those and change those and reset them, I think if we're all honest, it's not something that is done as often as maybe it should be. And even when it is, you're looking at averaging out demand over a period of time. So if we end up with a customer that buys 100 as a one-off, all of a sudden our system is telling us, well, based on that, if we look at the last 3 months as the average, all of a sudden we need to hold 33 a month. Or if we're looking at it over a year, then the system thinks we need to hold 10 a month, when in fact that situation you may even just buy that 100 for that customer at that time. Then the second area that we're looking at, as I briefly touched on then, is that average demand, and that's not taking into account things like seasonality or promotions that might have artificially inflated demand, or customers that no longer buy a product. Again, will change that demand going forward. And then because of that, it means that we've created a forecast that we're looking to fulfill the demand for, when really that forecast is not accurate. So this is where we really start to look at, well, what information do I need to look at to be able to calculate what stock I need and what to purchase and when. So the first thing, or one of the first things we need to understand, is how often do I actually order this product? Now, this is an area that gets forgotten by many businesses. All we really look at is, well, I've got a lead time of 12 weeks. Well, I actually only order that product once a month. So my lead time has just gone from 12 weeks to 16 weeks straight away. So I need to factor in the review time right at the start. Then, as we do, we need to look at the lead time. Now, with lead time, there's many factors that, again, we need to take into account. If we've got suppliers in China, and we need to factor in Chinese New Year. If we've got suppliers in Italy or France and they have shutdowns over periods, again, we need to try and work out somehow how we factor that into when we purchase and how much we do. We then need to look at our minimum order quantities, and this figure shouldn't be a static figure or a figure that we should be scared of. I think that we need to look at the MOQ and work out, is that MOQ right for us as a business? And if it's not, then maybe it's a case of sourcing it from a different supplier, or really trying to negotiate a better MOQ so that you're not holding huge amounts of excess stock in the warehouse and tying up capital that you could potentially invest in new lines or more of your more popular products. We then need to look at the service levels that you want to achieve. So if you have done an ABC analysis, I touched on in the first and second webinars, then we should really know that, well, actually 80 or 70% of our turnover is coming from 20 or 30% of our lines, and therefore it makes sense to want to achieve a higher service level on those products. So if we've got A line items with a 98 or 98.5% service level that we want to achieve, then we need to understand how that's going to impact the amount of stock that we're going to hold and want to hold. We then need to also look at the shipping costs and any other costs that are going to come into this as an overall picture, and take that into account as we start to look at things like the economic order quantity. So does it make sense to fill that container when in fact I don't have room in the warehouse to take another half a container? So on this occasion, no, let's not fill the container, let's not spend the extra capital just to save the shipping cost or to meet an MOV. There's other supplier conditions that we need to factor in, and some of these can't be ignored. If we want to buy a product from somebody, sometimes we just have to accept that we're going to have to do this. So we might have to look at things like container fill. Now, the important thing with container fill is that we don't just pick our biggest selling line and fill a container with it. Now, this is the easiest way of doing it, and some might say that the lazy way of doing it. But realistically, if you're buying more than 1 or 5 or 10 products from a supplier, then let's work out the most effective way of filling that container. Now that can be a massively manual task, and it's one of the areas, and I've tried to stay away from talking about how Slim4 will benefit you as a business and more look at the basics of inventory optimization, but Slim4 will look at all the products you can buy from that supplier and fill that container for you with very little input from yourself. So it's really taken away that pain. We've then got minimum order values which might come into effect. And again, it's working out how we get to that point as opposed to just picking the product that we sell the most of and thinking that that's the best way of filling that order. We then need to factor in the supplier's reliability. So with a lot of ERP systems, when you change the date that you expect to receive the order, it changes completely, and it means that you've got no real idea of when the item was actually due in, and measuring the supplier's performance can be difficult, but it is something that we need to try and do as best possible. What we want to stay away from is changing the lead time from the supplier and making it so that we are looking at the lead time from the supplier, but we're also calculating a level of reliability that means that if the supplier is always delivering a week late or a couple of days late, that we're just factoring in more buffer stock to fulfill demand for that uncertainty on whether it's going to come in on time. And then we've got things like factory shutdown. It's really important that we know by supplier anything that happens to that supplier on a yearly basis. Now, if you can only do this with your biggest suppliers, then fine, but try and do it at least on your top 20 or top 30 suppliers and work out exactly when they're going to be shut down, when they're not running at full capacity, and therefore giving yourselves the best opportunity to not be let down. Some other factors that we need to take into account is we need to get away from we hold 3 months worth of stock to cover any kind of uncertainty, and actually work out what the calculated buffer stock needs to be on these products. So we need to take into account the review time and the lead time and the supplier's reliability to work out what the most accurate level of buffer is going to be. Because if we look at an A-line item with a high stock turn, the level of buffer that we have on that product might be considerably different to a product that we sell 3 times a year to one customer. We then need to start looking at things like our economic order quantities. Now, this is quite a deep area, and sometimes an area that you want to look at as almost a phase 2 within this kind of review period. So the economic order quantity, and looking at, well, how much room do I have in my warehouse? How much can I afford to bring in? What is the cost of holding that product? And that's really an interesting area to look at. And it might be that the obvious example is something like bubble wrap, which yes, you may sell lots of as a business. It might be cheap to buy, you might make good margin on it, but in fact, looking at the size of it, you'd never really want to be holding too much of it. And then contract constraints. One thing at Slimstock is that most of our staff, in fact, the majority of our staff have done the role. They understand that it's not always as simple as I can buy 10 of that product on a week lead time. There's always contract constraints that can sometimes make it difficult to buy the quantity that you want to buy, and that mean that sometimes you just hold more stock than you would want to hold. So having those in place and understanding those and accepting that sometimes you will be overstocked on certain products, you do have a minimum order quantity that you have to hit, and therefore you're going to be holding long or a large amount of times worth of stock. So just a couple of high-level facts to finish off here. The big one for me is that 1% service level improvement roughly equates to 1% in additional turnover. Now, if you know what your current service level is, typically when I go to a business that is doing this manually using Excel spreadsheets, service levels are anywhere between 85 and 95%. I think to get any higher than that, you either have to throw in a lot of time or get yourself a tool like Slim4 to automate a large amount of your products. But if you can improve that 1% service level, or 2% or 5% even, the impact it can have on your turnover is massive. Now, when we enhance availability and service level, it brings more confidence to your sales teams. They start to believe that if they sell something, that they're actually going to be able to give it to their customer. It also starts to bring more harmony to the warehouse. So if we can get away from ordering the same product 10 times a week, and we start to look at the more economic way of ordering that product, or we start to fill containers and do things different ways, we can bring more harmony to the warehouse and put away times and so on. Holding optimal stock levels will release capital. So providing your service levels aren't terrible at the moment, if we can get to a point where you're holding the correct amount of stock, we've got the right minimum order quantities in the system with review times and so on, it gets us away from this let's hold 3 months worth or average demand, and gets us to the point where we're holding the actual stock that we need to hold to fulfill demand, and therefore we're not holding huge amounts of overstock on products that we don't sell. We can identify those, and over a period, it may not happen overnight, but we will be able to get to a point where we're holding better levels of stock. Thanks for joining me for this third webinar. If you do want to know any more, please get in touch. I'm happy to do a webinar with you or pop out and see you and really go through this in a bit more detail and a bit more relevant to your business, as many different businesses feel different pain points. So please do get in touch. If you're going to be at the show in a couple of weeks' time, we have a stand there, and I hope to see you then. I think we're at stand 40. Please pop over, and any questions that you have, again, feel free. Thanks again for joining me on today's webinar, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon.